Part 1, Digital Access Rights. The digital versus physical game argument has always been around, but with the recent destruction of digital property, it's gotten a lot more heated. By all means, digital purchases for games should make the most sense for the consumer. You get the product instantaneously, and if developers allow gamers to download ahead of launch, that means that they can play the game the moment it unlocks at midnight. There are MMOs and certain multiplayer games that of course prevent this, but a lot of these games are available right away. There's less clutter in your house to get rid of, and most modern games' resale value just don't hold up yet. Because of the ability to immediately acquire it from a digital publisher on a massive discount, these games are already meant to run natively on what we have. And once you're done with that 60+ hour RPG, it's not like you're going to return to it anytime soon, but the rapidly growing library of video games has decreased likelihood of replays. There's just so much out there. The digital side of the market is better for the environment as less products are being created, shipped, and delivered to your door. This saves on gas, plastic consumption, and factories contributing to a worsening climate problem. There's a benefit to developers too, mainly cost. We know that we're on borrowed time for the cost of video games. The value has not increased with inflation, and most games should be well over $100 USD by now. We can complain about a $10 increase for most games, but the truth is we're still robbing the bank, so to speak. For independent developers, digital distribution has made small launches possible. They risk more to deliver a game to us, usually with no safety net to fall back on if the game fails. And if something were to happen during production, there would likely be less of an attempt to help them at the drop of a hat. There's a difference between a couple hundred games being produced physically as an initial run to tens of thousands of games being produced. And yet, we're left with this question. Am I willing to risk having my game deleted or risk losing access to my game at a later date? Once upon a time, the conversation of digital media was a bunch of what-ifs. Although there are some with simple answers, what if I die? Most digital accounts can be passed down through a will. What if I'm banned? The publisher has the right to remove your account if you violate terms of service. There's always been one question that doesn't have a true answer to it. What if the publisher or developer decides to delete the game? What was once a far-off theory of someone could delete my digital library has come to the forefront of the physical versus digital media arguments. In December 2023, if you had certain television shows purchased through your PlayStation 4 or 5, you'd be waking up to the unhappy news of Sony deleting the content off of your library due to licensing agreements. There was no refund or compensation for the loss of titles, simply a whoops, we're not going to relicense that for you. On April 2nd, 2024, anyone having purchased a product from Funimation will have lost access to that content. They're migrating to Crunchyroll, and according to Sony, Crunchyroll doesn't support Funimation digital codes. As Forbes puts it, the erasure of Funimation from Sony is inexcusable. This is just the beginning of the consolidation of digital media, and if Microsoft really does leave the digital gaming space, as has been hinted towards, this issue could run rampant for people who game on the console. It's important to note that while Sony is adamant that users will not be reimbursed for the loss of Funimation digital media, Crunchyroll president Rahul Parini has said they're working on a case-by-case basis with users migrating from Funimation and are looking to help compensate them for the loss of their digital libraries. Sony isn't the only studio removing digital media from the hands of the consumer. What started as Warner Brothers claiming they would be deleting the Coyote vs. Acme film without release has moved to Warner Brothers is moving on to already released games next. A publisher for many smaller studios, Warner Brothers is currently in the midst of delisting or deleting games from Steam at the time of writing this episode. We are not sure whether Warner Brothers will go through with the deletion or whether they will delist the games from Steam. Both of these come with different issues, but a lot of developers still owning the IP to the game will likely choose to republish on Steam if allowed by Warner Brothers. This requires a rebuilding of the Steam community, reviews, and community-driven content that once was. When a game is delisted from Steam, you still have access to the property. There have been very few cases where you can no longer access the item at a further date. To my knowledge, one of the few games completely removed from users' libraries is one that required an online set of servers to play, and the developer shut down those servers. If Warner Brothers does delete the games, the digital access rights would be removed from all Steam libraries. But where does that leave us as the consumer? Surely not every company has the same stance that Steam does in terms of delisting. And there is no guarantee that Valve will continue to honor purchases after the removal of a product in the future. We are all guilty of getting that new privacy policy or new terms of service agreement and simply hitting accept. If they were to change it tomorrow, there's no guarantee you'd be caught by anyone. Netflix is notorious for removing Netflix originals, as the term has never been clearly defined and casts a wide net over several shows they simply have distribution rights to. This isn't a small selection of titles, it's well over 50. Disney Plus has also joined the ranks of Netflix in May 2023, choosing to remove dozens of Disney Plus originals from the streaming service. For music, TikTok lost most of its library in 2023, and in 2024 it failed to negotiate an extension of licensing and lost some of the most used artists, including Taylor Swift. This will force some content creators to delete videos they had not backed up, or at least dramatically harm the intention of the video. Retro games, DVDs, Blu-rays, and music devices are all dramatically increasing in price. As we are now realizing that true ownership cannot be attained through digital media, consumers are taking ownership back into their own hands. It would be easy to throw in a quip here like, next time you're deciding between a digital or a physical copy of a game, movie, Blu-ray, album, ask yourself if you want physical ownership or digital access. And although we talk about how it's physical ownership versus digital access, the truth is that physical media you own is also only a physical access purchase. You don't own the album or the movie or the game, you didn't make it. You simply own the access rights physically, and I think that makes it feel a bit more tangible to a lot of people. But still, we have to look at the future in regards to digital-only goods. Or rather, the past. Part 2, the digital dark age. The term digital dark age has been flying around social media. Most of us have backups of our photos, videos, and cherished memories on cloud service. Some families have gone so far as to scan physical photos and store them digitally, an extra backup of the memory should fire, flooding, or other physical damage occur. Things get lost, and this ensures that they are readily available for future generations. Western Digital, a popular service for backing up photos and videos, has not been without its issues in the past number of years. In 2021, my books were being deleted remotely by another cyber attack. They urged users to unplug the drives or risk losing all digital content. In 2023, they experienced a ransomware attack, leaking important digital information to the public. The servers were also offline for days, making the content unavailable for users. Cloud services can be attacked or compromised, and users can lose data unexpectedly. There's also the issue of cloud services deleting inactive accounts on a regular basis, such as Dropbox. Backing up your data digitally would at one point have been considered the fail-safe for any hard drive dying, for the physical container being stolen or destroyed, such as a laptop, desktop, or external hard drive, or simply losing the item on a computer after wiping a hard drive. Creating a backup library of your own for your photos, videos, and important documents is something that every user should be researching and acting on in the near future. A NAS storage or network access storage with a mirror backup is one of the most effective ways to have a first and secondary physical copy of any important memories, work, or other important digital files being backed up. But that doesn't come without its issues. NAS isn't easy to set up. It's not very user-friendly. If you are caught violating Google's terms of services, for instance, you could lose all your cloud backups in an instant from your Google OneDrive. These things that we think we own, we don't anymore. Get ready for that phrase again, as we have digital access to our backups, but nothing more. The conversation of backing up dramatically shifts when you take away the personal value of something, say home videos, and move more towards the gaming industry and historical archives of past games. Although we'd like to think of the general population as more educated in technology now than before, the concept of the digital dark age is not a new one. With Terry Kuny writing A Digital Dark Ages, Challenges in the Preservation of Electronic Information in 1997. 27 years later, and we still haven't found a solution for the issues highlighted within the document. Due to the rapidly changing technology at the time, there was an already large amount of data lost that likely has not been recovered to this day. Back then, large sets of data in both universities and governments were put on punch cards and 12-inch floppy disks. Most people I know don't have a CD drive, much less a floppy disk drive on their computer. Perhaps one of the most useful sources for archiving, and archiving correctly, are libraries. Kuny knew that back then, and we know that now. Quote, financial resources available for libraries and archives continue to decrease and will likely do so for the near future. The argument for preserving digital information has not effectively made it into public policy. There's little enthusiasm for spending resources on preservation at the best of times, and without a concentrated effort to bring the issues into the public eye, the preservation of digital information will remain a cloistered issue. End quote. Within Kuny's document is a proposed preservation nexus for digital media, and although this would still be useful as of today, some of the biggest questions back then and still now are, how do we decide what to preserve and how do we preserve it? Decisions on what needs to be preserved and what doesn't is a unique one within the gaming industry. Small games that we would think wouldn't have an impact on the industry can be talked about years down the road as a culturally relevant moment. Bisley Channel highlighted this in the video When Video Games Were Simple by talking about the licensed game era of the 90s and 2000s. Disney games were rampant on the SNES, and some of the games, like The Simpsons Hit and Run, are remembered as being, well, good. These licensed games, ranging from a simple CD in a cereal box to more recently the Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, had a lasting impact on the gaming industry, whether we like it or not. However, there are dozens, if not hundreds, thousands of games on the likes of Nintendo eShop, Steam, Epic Games stores that have not sold that many copies. These are still works of passion for the developers, but the unfortunate thing is these games just didn't land. Do we not save those games? Is there nothing we could learn from a failed game? What about The Lord of the Rings Gollum? How did a licensed franchise end up with such a poorly developed game, and how did that game even come to be? One of the only ways for video game preservation we currently have is through the Video Game History Foundation, which is working on a physical and digital media library for historical purposes. One of the key aspects of this preservation is through source code for video game development. The fortunate thing for video games, in the end, is that the preservation of the history does not have to be kept on the original cartridge, CD, DVD, or file. The content needs to be usable and readable in the case of source codes. The rapidity of changing technology may end up with dozens of copies of the same game, but the ease of storing these games will continue since, once again, we don't need the original device to run them. The Internet Archive, torrent sites, and other forms of storing digital content has additional copies, although perhaps not as in-depth, of these games. Highlighted in Kuny's original work, and still important to this day, is the legality of keeping digital content stored. Rights and access to electronic objects, especially during a mostly digital age, may make it illegal for any archives, whether nonprofit, library, or government, to keep hold of these games forever. This puts us in a tricky position. Do we all begin purchasing physical media again? Or do we willingly allow things to disappear if not passed down from generation to generation, accepting that some things just won't be preserved for the future? Part 3. The case for the environment. There is an interesting crossover of Gen Z and the collection of physical media. And the reason why I say interesting is because I've never met a generation who cares so much about the environment as a whole. It's not one or two people from this generation, it's a lot of them. They care. And it's easy to feel like we have no direct impact on what happens to the climate around us. Things are not looking up, and for those of us in Canada and the USA, the option of public transit, walking, or biking to destinations is likely unavailable. One of the only options we have from city to city is flights or trains, which are both incredibly expensive to take. For most of us in Canada, owning a car is a necessity. Even in some major cities, the public transit system is unreliable, often goes in indirect ways, and adds an hour onto a trip that realistically should take 15 minutes by car. Not driving a car is one of the best things you can do, but if not that, what else? Buying less is one of the better ways to support a healthy planet. There is less in landfills, less being manufactured, and less being delivered to your doorstep. Things like thrifting, buying secondhand, and purchasing retro consoles don't necessarily add to all of these things. However, purchasing new physical media does, and it supports the idea of making more and more for the landfill. I think it's an interesting intersection of ideologies, and not everyone holds one holds the other type thing, but it's something to think about when we talk about physical media. We are responsible for the planet around us, we are responsible for how we take care of it, and owning less physical things and purchasing less physical things is going to help keep the planet in a better state. I do believe there are ways to make these physical games better for everyone. We've stopped including manuals, which although nostalgic, it means less paper. Cases could become smaller, which would produce less plastic, and we could make more copies on demand. Which, to be fair, the last one a lot of companies have started doing. The EB Games I frequent have told me on multiple occasions that I should pre-order whatever game I am interested in, as they've only sent 2 to 3 extra copies over pre-orders. It's not uncommon to see sold out the day of a not-so-popular release, and this is why they don't get a lot of extra copies anymore. With digital media, the carbon footprint is reduced, but not unavoidable. Although this is a newer research area for climate change, it's estimated that technology takes up about 3.7% of total global emissions. There are lots of small tips on how to reduce your impact as an individual, but the one thing I couldn't find is how much data transferring causes this number to go up or down. So, say instead of purchasing a game that could be put into the plastic case, put onto a disc, shipped to the store, purchased by you, and either shipped or driven home, versus the idea of downloading an 80 GB game. These would both have very different impacts and additions to our carbon footprint as an individual. My gut wants to say physical media is worse, but I also believe in the preservation of digital content, so I'm sort of at a loss as to what's safer. Digital is likely a solution, but how are we supposed to solve the issue of digital access rights and actually owning the product that we purchased? Part 4, where do we go from here? Our part in the world of digital preservation is a tricky one. I would say that each family, just like in historical times, is obligated to preserve family history. Photos of loved ones, videos, and anything that could hold meaning for future generations should be meticulously curated for the future. Perhaps this is a massive undertaking for a lot of people, but starting with immediate family members and working your way out to cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, grandchildren, etc. is a way to start documenting who you are as a family. Our family records could, in theory, never be better, but for a lot of people, the searching for family history is still a large part of their lives. When it comes to video games, movies, or music, the role of who actually owns the game comes into play. In an ideal world, companies would keep digital versions of their games on hand at all time. In a perfect world, developers would keep a joint development diary going so we could remember how everything came to be. We wouldn't need things like a hurricane, an unofficial oral history of Street Fighter II, which tells the story of how Street Fighter II came to be. The book covers the impact on the gaming community, developers, and everyone who quickly embraced this fighting game as one of the most important video games of all time. But if you couldn't tell from the title alone, it doesn't really have a lot of facts about what the heck happened to Street Fighter II to where it is now. If it wasn't for some editors at Polygon, it's likely we wouldn't even know anything about this. This would not be documented in the way that it is. The interviews that we do get from individuals in the industry are, at times, largely unhelpful. There are some where we get something informative, like the developers from Blizzard explaining that the Demon Hunter jump only worked after they played Mega Man, or the Ken Levine interview that broke down the Elizabeth team for BioShock Infinite, or the countless interviews with Derek Yu, creator of Spelunky. Largely, though, journalism nowadays revolves around telling us what to think instead of giving us information and delivering it in an informative way. So why should we keep any of this around? And honestly, what's the worst that happens if we don't preserve these video games? Our children or grandchildren can't play them? There will always be more. It's just a game in the end, and the people around us are a lot more important. And something that came to me as I am recording this, and as I'm thinking about this, is that we recently lost a huge part of the gaming industry. We lost Game Informer from EB Games. It's gone. It's done. The website, it's over. I'm sure Wayback Machine has a lot of that content, but it was just, the plug was pulled. It's done. There are physical issues out there, but our digital access to that website has been revoked. We are in the digital dark age. We are in a moment where we are going to lose things. It's going to be a lot of things. So we need to make the decision. What is important for me to back up? And what is important for me to remember? And if you can live comfortably knowing with what you've backed up, then I think that's fine. Life is short. Yes, we should be kind to future generations, but enjoy life, embrace it. Doesn't need to all be lived through digital access rights and physical media and this and that. Get some experiences. As always, thanks for listening.